His Excellency, Minister Cohen, Deborah Liebstadt, U.S. Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Antisemitism, ladies and gentlemen, friends. In June 2014, the Knesset enacted the day to mark the departure and deportation of the Jews from Arab countries and Iran law. Throughout the Middle East and North Africa, extensive and vibrant Jewish communities lived and flourished for more than 1,000 years. During the Middle Ages, these communities were the largest, most active, and significant part of the Jewish people. Approximately 100 years ago, everything changed. Arab nationalism, Nazi and fascist concept, New World Order, and of course, the establishment of the States of Israel resulted the deportation and immigration of hundreds of thousands of Jews from Arab countries and Iran, and the total disappearance of ancient communities. For the past 9 years, the States of Israel and Israel's missions around the world have marked this important day. This year, we will look at the connection between the Jewish communities in Arab countries, contemporary anti-Semitism, including what we have seen since the start of the recent war, and the relationship between all of these components. I want to say thank you to Ruth Cohen-Dar, Director of Department for Combating Antisemitism and Holocaust Remembrance, for organizing these events together with our friends in INSS. And I would like to wish, on behalf of all of us, that the light of the eighth Hanukkah candle, which we will lit tonight, will be a blessing for our soldiers, for the return of our hostages, and for peace in Israel and the entire world. Minister Cohen, please.
Thank you, Hamutal. Dear Ambassador, Professor Dvorah Liebstadt, dear friends, good afternoon. Today we mark a significant part in the history of the Jewish people and the State of Israel. The expulsion and immigration of Jews from Arab countries in the Middle East and North Africa, and from Iran. In the 40s and the 50s, about 850,000 Jews were forced to immigrate or were expelled from Arab countries. As a consequence, entire communities ceased to exist. I might say also in a personal note, that also my family as well, that part of them came from Egypt, from Algeria. I think that in Algeria today, when it was more than 140,000 Jews, today there are 0, and in Egypt this is less than 100. The Jewish population that live in those countries left behind a cultural properties and a vibrant life of 1,000 years. 1,000 years, and of course, we as the Jews, when we are going to visit those sites, we used to go in to visit the synagogue, the cemeteries, and other places as well. With the arrival to Israel, which was always upon to Jews from all over the world, they significantly shaped the culture and the history of the country in all aspects of life until this day. Unfortunately, the anti-Semitism that exists back then in those countries still exists today and even grows larger. We saw it mainly after the massacre of the 7th of October, when we see a dramatic rise in the anti-Semitism, 12 times more if we compare it to the previous period in the year. The murderous attack on the 7th of October was not created in a vacuum. The attack was a translation of years of haters and fostering the humanization of Jews and Israeli into brutal action. And we are still seeing it today. We, of course, as a country, are all the time looking to have peace with our neighbor. We are very proud that 3 years ago we signed the Abraham Accords with Morocco, with Bahrain, with the Emirates. It was very important for us. We're supposed to sign in the next 2 months the peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. That definitely one of the target of the last attack on the 7th of October is to block and prevent the peace process with Saudi Arabia, which actually the peace process between Israel and Saudi Arabia, it's symbolized ending the conflict between the Jewish people and most of the Muslim people as well. But this was one of the targeted of Iran through their proxies. And important to me to say this day that we are not fighting Hamas. We are fighting Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Huts in Yemen, which is more than 1,700 kilometers from Israel. There is only one thing which connecting all these terror organizations, which is Iran, which is finance them. You know that we heard from Lebanon that they are not willing to have war with Israel, but they say we don't control the Hezbollah. They receive the funds and the instruction not from Beirut, from Tehran. Unfortunately, the anti-Semitism is rising, and this tragedy brought in this wake a strong and dangerous wave of bold anti-Semitism that hurts not only Jews, but also harm fundamental values of society. The words must not be confused by the deception of Hamas and the evil forces that stand behind them. They clearly state their intention to whip out the state of Israel. From the river to the sea, there is only one mean, which their goal is that Israel will not exist. It's important to me to say, and I'm saying to all the foreign ministers which I met with, that there was no dispute between Israel and Gaza in regards to the land. In 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza completely, till the last millimeter. There was leaders in Europe and other places that told us that they will build a Singapore there. But instead, they took the money which they received by contribution, and they, instead of building hospitals, commercial center, industrial zone, they took the money to dig tunnels below the kibbutzim, to build a rocket factory. This is what they went with the money after we withdrew from the last millimeter. And it was a ceasefire. And the country which they are calling right now to ceasefire, there is one thing that will be, that Hamas will remain. But we will continue until we defeat Hamas. Not just for the security of the state for Israel, but also for the people in Gaza. See what happened to them in the last 18 years, but also for the entire region. And I can say you clearly that I receive messages from all the modest Muslim countries in the region. They are telling us, finish the job for the region as well. What we saw in the 7th of October, such atrocities should not be happening in any part of the world. We cannot allow ourselves to see women raped and burned alive, murdering children, murdering entire families. We cannot allow ourselves to kidnap people while we are sitting here in this beautiful building. Kfir Bibas is not a child, he's a baby, 11 months old, he's in captive. The position that being taken in some parts of the world supporting the murder attack of the 7th of October is encouraging and strengthening Hamas. And some of the countries which are sitting here support the ceasefire in the last vote in the UN. And who was bless you for this vote? The Hamas. After this vote, the Hamas thanks to the country that support the ceasefire. So if Hamas is blessed, and thank you for your vote, you need to think twice if you did the right thing. I must tell you, and you know Israel, we don't looking to have wars. We are looking to have peace. Also, with Gaza. This is what was a ceasefire on the 6th of October. And also in Lebanon. For us, there are two options to solve the threats from the Hezbollah: a diplomatic solution or a military solution. We prefer the diplomatic solution. But if we don't have any choice, we will need to protect our people. We must accept reality and describe it as it is, so that we can face this great threat, not only to the Jewish people and the State of Israel, but also to the liberal and democratic way of life, based on fundamental rights and equality, justice and freedom. Cooperation and coordination are the key to confront the phenomenon of anti-Semitism. We must strengthen and create cooperation mechanisms as well as collective others in order to succeed and defeat this dangerous phenomenon. The project that our ministry is leading together with the INSS regarding anti-Semitism in the Arab world is an example for such a mechanism. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Institute for National Security Studies for the cooperation. I would also like to thank Ambassador Lippstadt. Dvorah, thank you very much. Thank you for all what you are doing in the last year. I think that without your great work, the situation was totally worse. And I truly appreciate and thank you for visiting us in these days. Last, I thank all of you, our friends and allies from different parts of the world, for saying no to anti-Semitism and confronting it. Thank you for the solidarity and support during our fight against terror. Your influence on the world is very significant in this difficult time. Thank you all. Toda rabba.
Thank you, Minister Cohen. It's an honor for me to be here and cooperate with my dear colleague Hamutal in the framework of our cooperation with the INSS. The panel of experts that we're going to present here soon is part of a common project that is running already 1 year, and it had two goals. One is to expand the base of knowledge, and the second is to create a community of knowledge and opportunities. We wanted to look at opportunities more than at challenges, which we all well know. It was about 2 years ago when we started talking about it, and we were very optimistic. And unfortunately, 7th of October came, and the atrocities, which are in practice a watershed event, has changed a lot of how at least I myself see things, and a lot is really standing and depending out there with a really deep crisis of trust. We want to try and discuss today the issues of the narratives that are wandering around in the Arab world and how it reflects in communities around the world and how it manifests itself. But before going to the panel discussion, it is a great honor for me to invite Professor Deborah Lipstadt to give the keynote. And Deborah, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
תודה רבה רותי, תודה על כל העבודה שלך, לא רק לארגן את הכנס היום, אבל כל העבודה שאנחנו עושים יחד. זה באמת בשבילי ולצוות שלי ולטים, כמו שאני אומרת, שיש לי ב-State Department, זה הנאה לעבוד איתך ועם הקולגים שלך. ולמיניסטר כהן, תודה רבה על המילים, דברים היוצאים מן הלב נכנסים ללב, וכך זה היה. תסלחו לי שאני אדבר באנגלית. I'm going to talk in English. As I like to say, my Hebrew may be okay for thank yous, but when it comes to professional matters, I don't have certain terms that work in Hebrew that I do have in English, and the example I always use is nuance. I don't know how you say nuance in Hebrew, but I was told nuance, so, but, and I also want to pay call attention to the work of Michal Kotler-Wunsch, who has just only entered office recently in extremely difficult days, but your enthusiastic work on this topic has really been felt and been heard. And again, the way you speak from the heart has entered the hearts of many people. I'm going to step back from the exact topic, which we'll really cover and address in the excuse me, panel itself, and step back and try to set a context for some of the issues we will be discussing. I'm cognizant of the fact that tonight is the final night of Hanukkah, a festival of lights, and for this country, these have been very dark days. I've been here before. As a very young girl, I was here in 1967. I was moved to past the National Library, the magnificent new National Library, because I was one of the last groups to study at Givat Ram. And I was here in June 1967, and they needed help cleaning up Har HaTzofim for the concert, the famous concert of Leonard Bernstein. And so they sent a bus to pick us up. And the bus driver didn't have a number. It was one day after the war, I think the war had ended. So he took a 6 and he put it upside down, because if some of you may know, it was line 9, I believe, that used to go up to Har HaTzofim. And the place I was assigned to clean up was the National Library up there, and now you have a new National Library here. So it sort of took me through my own personal history. But having said that, when I came into office, approximately a year and a half ago, one of my main foci, one of my main objectives was to work on what you in Israel call Heskemei Avraham, the Abraham Accords. I did so because that was one of the things that compelled me to say I'm going to give up my very comfortable academic position to go into the world of diplomacy, which is a whole other world. Because in terms of when working on anti-Semitism, which I've done for decades, rarely does one have a chance to do something affirmative. Rarely does one have to do something positive. Rarely does one get the chance to address the issue not of Jew as object, but of Jew as subject. Not what is done to Jews, but what Jews do. And here was a chance to do something. Naturally, in terms of my portfolio, it was less involvement in the intricacies of the foreign relations between Israel and these Muslim-majority countries, but certainly in addressing the anti-Semitism which had been present in many of these countries, whether officially or unofficially, and stressing the fact in these countries, Saudi Arabia, which was not yet part of the Abraham Accords, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco to talk about the fact that Jews were indigenous to the region. And throughout that first approximately year and a half, I made numerous trips to these countries, and many of them had many powerful experiences. Since I know some of you have Moroccan roots, I was deeply touched on my first day in Casablanca. I was visiting the Grand Mosque, and as we were going into the building, I heard a woman speaking Hebrew to the person she was with. I assume it was her husband, I don't know, but they were talking Hebrew. So I said in Hebrew, At me Aretz, are you from Israel? And she's, no, I said, are you At me Morocco? And she said, no, Safta. Safta is from Meknes, came from Morocco. I said, so you've never been here? She said, no. And I'll say in Hebrew what she said to me, Aval hamakom hazeh medaber li lalev. This place speaks to my heart. And there really was a hope for furthering and strengthening and building the relationship. One of the great worries of the Moroccan government was how was it going to have enough kosher meat to satisfy all the Israeli tourists that it expected in the coming year. Those things, some of those things have been put on hold, but our hope is, and my government's hope is, and I know many of the governments here, and certainly is I believe Israel's hope, is that it is temporarily put on hold, that things will yet move forward in a very positive way. But there is the giant monster in the room, and that is, of course, anti-Semitism. And in addition to having worked certainly till October 7th on moving forward on the Abraham Accords, on getting some of these countries to acknowledge and to recognize and to teach about Jews being indigenous to these countries and indigenous to this region, much of my work up until October 7th and even more so now has been addressing the demonization of Jews and legitimizing, certainly in Muslim majority countries, the notion of Jewish peoplehood, both in upper levels, governmental levels, and in grassroots, in terms of grassroots initiatives. While the current situation has aroused passions and allowed some political actors to revert to the hateful rhetoric that we saw for so many decades, I am, as I noted earlier, my government is, and I believe, again, as I said earlier, that the leadership here in Israel, the Israeli government, is cautiously optimistic, if not more than cautiously optimistic, that this can be renewed. What we've seen, but before anything like that can be renewed, we have to address what has happened since October 7th in terms of anti-Semitism. And before October 7th, I used to speak about a spike, and then as some things got a little worse, I used to talk about a surge. Now I don't do that. I talk about a tsunami of anti-Semitism. It's been approximately 2 months since the war, and we've seen Holocaust memorials vandalized in Canada, France, Greece, Denmark, and the United States. We've seen Molotov cocktails thrown at synagogues in Berlin and Montreal. A synagogue in Tunisia was burned to the ground. Another one in Yemen was attacked by arsonists. We've seen Jews peacefully protesting on the streets of European and American cities physically abused. Jewish schools fired upon. In parts of Latin America and South Africa, certain political actors have reverted to irresponsible, contemptible anti-Semitic rhetoric. However, there is some, shall we say, good news in this bleak situation. And since October 7th, I have been in Rome. I was there when the war began. I have spoken to officials in Rome. I've spoken to officials Vatican, Paris, Germany, Canada, and then in the United States with many of the representatives of other countries, particularly European countries. And what I can say, and Israelis might describe this as chatzi nechama, half a consolation, that many of these governments are taking the issue of anti-Semitism very seriously. And they're taking the issue of anti-Semitism very seriously for a number of reasons. First and foremost, generally, in terms of protection of a vulnerable community in their midst. And this is especially so on the European continent, where there are small Jewish communities not by natural attrition, but because of a tragedy of the Shoah. But they're also taking it very seriously because many of them have come to recognize, and we're hoping more so do, and we're hoping not only the leaders, but the general populace, media, et cetera, will recognize that anti-Semitism is, as I mentioned a moment ago, of course it's a threat to Jews. And were it just a threat to Jews, it would be a worthwhile thing to fight. Because in many essence, and I'm boiling this down, I know there are legal representatives of countries who might cringe in my analogy, but on some level, a government's job is to act in loco parentis, not to children, but to the communities, the people in its midst. And just as parents pay special attention when they have special needs children, so government should pay special attention when there are communities that are vulnerable. Not special needs because they are weak, but vulnerable to attack. And that is the job of governments to do. So for that alone, anti-Semitism would be a valid thing to be on the agenda, the domestic agenda of any country. However, I think it's really important to recognize that anti-Semitism is more than just, and I put just in quotation marks, more than just that. It is also a threat to democracy. Why is it a threat to democracy? Because the person who is an anti-Semite has bought into the conspiracy myth, not conspiracy theory, it's not a theory, it's a myth, the conspiracy myth that Jews control media, government, judges, elections, banks, control everything. And if you believe that Jews control everything, then essentially you've given up on democracy. So the anti-Semitic myth, the anti-Semitism and the conspiracy myth that goes with it is a threat to democracy. But there's something else as well. And this was evident before October 7th, but anybody who had any doubts about it, they should have been dispelled since October 7th, that we see anti-Semitism, and I know the INSS has looked at this in this regard as well, as a threat to national security, international stability. That there are bad actors in this world, countries, NGOs, individuals, who recognize that anti-Semitism is like a cooking spoon that stirs up the pot of stability. That anti-Semitism, for the Yiddish speakers amongst you, a kochlöffel, you would say, you're stirring up the pot. They are, as some of us like to talk about, it's utilitarian anti-Semitism. It's not anti-Semitism by conviction. Some people at least really believe in what, I mean, it's crazy to say, but at least they believe in their anti-Semitic ideology. But others, and then of course at the other end of the spectrum, there are those who adopt it but don't understand what they're adopting, as we've seen on some of these protests when people have been asked what they're chanting, they don't know which river, which sea, they don't know exactly what it's all about. But so you have, those two spectrums, but you also have in the midst those who would use anti-Semitism as a means to further their ends. And in this case, their ends would be destabilizing other countries. Destabilizing countries by any means possible. So if I can begin to introduce anti-Semitism, whether it's paying people to paint Jewish stars on homes and apartment buildings that house Jews, or to demonstrate, or to cause disruption to Jewish institutions, it works in my benefit. So I think that it's very important in addressing this topic, recognizing that we're not just talking about the welfare of a particular community, but we're talking about something far larger, far more expansive. And I have seen in my travels, as I mentioned earlier, that increasingly, certainly European governments recognize this. Maybe not as much as they should, but it is something that is exceptionally important. And since October 7th, that's really been the focus of much of my work and my team at the State Department. I'll give you an example. We've seen expressions of anti-Semitism on Chinese-controlled, Chinese-owned social media platforms, and you have to ask, what's going on here? And it's hard to understand it without seeing it in this fashion as a way of destabilizing the West. And I don't mean only China, but it's just one example which sort of blatantly illustrates the problem. My country, the Biden administration, and the Congress, and rarely in my country in these days can you speak about bipartisan issues. I think that's more and more a word that is too rarely used in many countries, but there is a bipartisan commitment to fighting anti-Semitism. And I think it is exceptionally important that we stress, no matter what country it is, America, other European democracies, and even Israel, and I say this quite specifically, the fight against anti-Semitism cannot become a political weapon. In my hearings before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, because as an ambassador I had to be nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate, one of the questions that was asked to me is, do I see anti-Semitism from the left? Which do I think is more dangerous, from the left or from the right? And I said, I don't do equations of what's more dangerous. They're both dangerous in their own fashion. And I pointed out to the senator who was asking me this, I told him that I have friends on the left who see the anti-Semitism on the right, Charlottesville, Poway, AFD, and various other countries, and what they're seeing is very accurate. They are seeing what is really there. And conversely, I have friends on the right who see anti-Semitism on the left, and what they see, they are very accurate. They are not neither side is exaggerating one whit. They recognize the problem, they analyze the problem, their analysis is compelling, and generally their analysis of its existence accurate. The problem is, many of them do not see it right beside them. They only see it on the other side of the political transom. And in that sense, they are weaponizing. You have to ask, are you only interested in it as a political weapon to beat up on people on the other side of the transom? Or are you interested in the issue in and of itself? And I would urge that we recognize this, going back to my initial comments, of this as an international danger, and how important it is not to let the fight against anti-Semitism become politically weaponized. It is an affront to the integrity of our laws, it is a gateway to prejudice, to racism, and it is a destabilizer. We've seen, and I know my time is short, so I'm going to bring this to a conclusion, but we've seen, how someone asked me recently, a fellow diplomat, why would protesters go to a Jewish restaurant, kosher restaurant, Israeli-style restaurant in Philadelphia, and protest what is going on there? What's the connection? Why would they protest in front of a synagogue? It shows that much of the opposition, people taking political opposition to Israel, just see all Jews as responsible. It's the overflow of the anti-Semitism related to this particular war, this particular crisis, and it becomes either an excuse for an expression of their anti-Semitism, or it becomes, in their minds, it's all the same. We've watched people pull down posters of hostages with glee. Not just pull down the posters, but do it joyfully. You have to ask, what is that about? We have students sometimes afraid to go to universities if there is a demonstration. Is it safe to go? I've heard this story in too many places. And it's not, we used to say, for many of my predecessors were able to come to settings like this or go to other countries and say, you have a problem, I can't do that. We have a problem, we have the problem in the United States as well. So in conclusion, conscious and unconscious anti-Semitism has bled into the thinking of too many people. The story of Jews in Arab lands, Jews who trace their history back to Muslim-majority countries, is particularly important, because part of this anti-Semitic story is, of course, Jews as white, Jews as privileged, Jews as Western, and we know that is not the case. Our fight against anti-Semitism is going to be a long one. It is baked into the DNA of the world's culture in a way that no other prejudice is baked into it. But for the welfare and the well-being of our societies, it is something we must address. So I am very grateful to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to the Minister of the Foreign Minister, to INSS, and to all of you for being here for this important discussion. Thank you very much.
Minister. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Minister Cohen. It is a pleasure and an honor to bring online a good colleague of ours and an important persona in the arena of combating anti-Semitism, the Special Envoy of the European Union, Ms. Katharina von Schnurbein. Katharina, you have 5 minutes, and the audience is all with you. Thank you for joining us from Brussels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruti. Shalom, Chaverim. Shalom lekulam. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I would like to thank the MFA and also INSS for this timely debate. And I'm pleased to join you from Brussels. I can only imagine what you have been going through since the 7th of October, as we have seen also unfolding in front of our eyes incredible forms of anti-Semitism here in Europe. This has impacted significantly on the Jewish communities here, and I will be addressing briefly the situation for the Jews here in Europe, and also what we at the European Commission, at the European Union, are doing to address this situation. You will not be surprised that we have seen a significant rise of anti-Semitic content on all social media platforms, the moderated one, but in particular also those without moderation. On X, for example, anti-Semitic content was up 919% in the week after the 7th of October. And the hashtag Hitler was right increased by 1,600% the day after the heinous Hamas attacks. As we all know, the road from hate speech to hate crime is very short, and so we have not witnessed such mobilization of anti-Semitic hatred on the streets and extremism, including through demonstrations that glorified the terror of Hamas and glorified also the Holocaust since the founding of the European Union. We have seen anti-Semitic acts increase, so really attacks against Jews or against premises, Jewish premises, in Germany 320%, in Austria 300%, in the Netherlands 800%. In France, we saw 1,700 acts that were recorded in the first 5 weeks after the attack, and that is opposed to 436 acts in the whole of 2022. So the situation is very severe and has an incredible impact on the Jewish community. We see the harassment of Jews, and Deborah, who is a dear colleague, and much of what I will be saying actually aligns very much to what she just mentioned in the wider global context. We have seen harassment of Jews on university campuses. We see Molotov cocktails thrown into synagogues, Stars of David sprayed on houses. The incidents really remind us of the darkest time in history of Europe. What is different now is that this time national governments and also the European Union are on the side of the Jewish community. This is done with a clarity that could not be more apparent. The Jewish community lives in fear. We have to acknowledge this and we have to act. And the ultimate aim and the heart really of the European Union strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life that we adopted in 2021 has at its very heart the idea of fostering Jewish life, of ensuring that Jewish life can flourish in Europe. And as we see at the moment that Jews are retracting and that they are taking off symbols, wearing Stars of David, or take off their kippot, as they are taking their mezuzahs off their doors or changing their names on doorbells, we are using all the instruments we have to act and to ensure that Jews in Europe can be safe and can see a future for themselves and for their children in Europe. One important aspect of this is to side with the Jewish community publicly and to also celebrate with them. And Hanukkah was a very good occasion for this. President von der Leyen herself, she went to ignite the big menorah, giant menorah that is in the heart of the European Quarter in Brussels on Sunday. We celebrated Hanukkah with Commission staff, Jewish and non-Jewish staff, together with Commissioner Vaheli, who is responsible for neighborhood policy. This was also in the context of a dialogue and diversity initiative, which brings together Jews and Muslims. And as you can imagine, this has also been challenging in the last weeks, but we do want to progress in this area. Commissioner Jourova, who is responsible for the defense of democracy within the European Commission, went to see the European Union of Jewish Students for their 45th anniversary, also last weekend. So we have used these occasions. Myself, I spoke at the big demonstration that took place in Brussels against anti-Semitism on Sunday. We think it is important to be very clear that Europe sides with the Jewish community and that we will use also our policies in order to ensure what we can do with all the instruments to roll back anti-Semitism. One important aspect, we know, as I said in the beginning, social media is the #1 entry point into our living rooms for anti-Semitism. We have in Europe the Digital Services Act, which is the first legal framework of any region in the world to regulate actions of the platforms. It obliges them in particular to assess the risk of their action for society and to present the European Commission with plans how to mitigate these risks. They can use their different tools, for example, the algorithms, but they have to present us with concrete plans. And in view of the explosion of illegal content that we saw in the days after the attacks, Commissioner Thierry Breton, who is responsible for internal market, on the 10th of October wrote to several of the big platforms and reminding them of their duties to ensure that their platforms do not spread illegal content. And he reminded them also that in case of non-compliance, they can be fined, according to this legislation, up to 6% of their annual turnover. So on the European Commission side, everybody is mobilized as we see the challenges that the Jewish community is facing. We are also, for example, creating a network of trusted flaggers that will identify anti-Semitic content in all EU languages, but also in non-EU languages. And we already just heard also from Deborah that increasingly from non-EU countries, anti-Semitism is utilized to destabilize the EU, and this also needs addressing. A prerequisite for Jewish life is the security of Jewish communities, and so we are increasing funding to ensure the security of Jewish premises, together with the member states. And I want to be very clear that this is not limited to the European Commission. Governments and national actors have been very strong in ensuring and in responding to the anti-Semitic upsurge that we have seen. But, and that also was already mentioned by Deborah, the rise of anti-Semitism, of course, targets above all the Jews. It threatens their security, it threatens their community life, their right to assembly freely, their right to education, their cultural traditions. And that in itself would be sufficient to address it. But we see with this rise of extremism that we have seen also erupt on European streets, that it is a threat to democracy and to public security. And more we are integrating the work of the prevention of radicalization and the prevention of extremism with the work to address anti-Semitism. The recently foiled attacks against Jews and Israeli targets, for example, in Cyprus, in Vienna, in Berlin, show that anti-Semitism is not only a question of discrimination or of racism, but it threatens security and societal cohesion, really. It puts into question democratic values of equality and the respect for the individual, really the European way of life as we see it and as we have built it since the Second World War. Unfortunately, this rise of extremism has also targeted other groups. In particular, we see heightened anti-Muslim hatred, and there is a colleague of mine who is responsible for addressing anti-Muslim hatred in that sense. We have also put forward, as a matter of urgency, a communication which is entitled "No Place for Hate, a Europe United Against Hatred," and it calls on all Europeans, so state actors as well as civil society actors, the media, religious actors, the cultural sector, academia, where we have seen significant rise in particular and harassment and threats of Jews on campuses, to stand up and to speak up against hatred and for the respect of the individual, because we see this is essential obviously for Jewish life, but it is also essential for Europe as a whole. Dear friends, as it is often the case in such tremendous crises as we are seeing them at the moment, it is also an opportunity to move forward, to integrate our policies, to align our policies, to build bridges in a way that probably they would not have been possible in the same speed. And so we are using this situation also to make sure that we address anti-Semitism and the security question, the threat to democracy in a wider and concerted way together with the EU member states. I wish you a very meaningful lighting of the 8th candle of Hanukkah tonight, and I look forward to the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katarina. Thank you for your commitment, your hard work, and everything that you are doing. Without further ado, I would like to invite my dear colleague Adi Kantor from the INSS, and before that, I would like to really say a big thank you to Shachar Elam, who's heading the project, to Adi's right hand, to Arik Agassi, to Udi Rosen, to Morlink, the one and only, and Ophir Winter, who made all the way here to share with us their knowledge and their expertise. I'm sure it will be an interesting panel discussion. Thank you.
Dear Professor Lipstadt, dear Commissioner von Schnurbein, distinguished ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On 6:30 a.m. on Saturday morning of October 7th, the morning of Simchat Torah holiday, a holiday celebrated by Jews all over the world, 1,112 Israeli citizens, men, women, children, babies, disabled and elderly, were slaughtered by terrorist organization Hamas, as well as by Palestinian civilian collaborators. Babies were shot in their beds, in their pajamas. Children were beheaded in front of their parents. Mothers and fathers were burned alive in front of their children. Ladies and gentlemen, the 7th of October was hell on earth. The massacre of Jews on that bright daylight, on Israeli soil, on that horrible Saturday, 80 years after the Shoah, shocked Israel, shocked the entire world. This hell continues to this very moment, as there are still 135 Israeli hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. They are kept in darkness with no medicaments, food, or idea of time. Due to this massacre and to protect the lives of its citizens, Israel engaged in a war against the terrorist organization Hamas. Since the beginning of the war, it seems that truth and facts are, in many parts of the world, questionable and even denied. Too many people across the globe today are not confused by the facts. To them, it's also maybe a matter of context. Across the Arab world, and not only there, Jew hatred has risen to horrendous, unprecedented numbers. Anti-Israel demonstrations, riots, calling for the destruction and annihilation of the Jewish state are loudly heard and seen. Demonstrators spread vicious lies, conspiracy theories, and dangerous historical revisions on the streets and on social media. The spillover of those events is also seen in the West, in campuses, in US Congress, on the streets, from Berlin, London, to Paris and New York, everywhere. After October 7th, it is nowhere safe if you're a Jew, if you're an Israeli. And if you're an Israeli Jewish woman and you were raped, well, women organizations will not support nor believe you. And this in 2023. Our panel today is an invitation to dive for an hour into narratives of Jews in Israel in the Arab world since that horrible Saturday morning that are in the center of discourse. Narratives which are not new, but after October 7th have reached the most dangerous point from words into actions. We will analyze their manifestations as well as their spillover in the West and ask how are they affecting Western liberal discourses as well, and what can be done to combat them. We will, of course, later on open the discussion here in the venue and allow you, of course, to ask questions and refer. I'd like to invite to the stage our distinguished speakers, to sit on the stage. INSS staff. And of course, Professor Deborah Lipstadt is invited to sit next to them. Our first speaker is Dr. Ophir Winter. Ophir is senior researcher at INSS. He holds a PhD from the Department of Middle Eastern and African History at Tel Aviv University. He's also the author of 2 books, Zionism in Arab Discourses, and the recently published Peace in the Name of Allah, Islamic Discourses on Treaties with Israel. The title of his presentation is Al-Azhar's Endorsement of the October 7th Attack. Please, Ophir.
Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. It's a great honor to be here. Professor Lipstadt, Ruti, Adi, ambassadors, it's great to be here. Since the October 7th attack, we have observed various positions in the Arab Muslim world, ranging from supporting the killing of innocent Israeli civilians to denouncing terrorism and condemning Hamas. Unfortunately, one of the most alarming responses has come from the Islamic institution of Al-Azhar in Egypt. I would like to start with a very short background about Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar is an Islamic academy founded in Cairo in 1998 and currently operates as one of the world's largest universities with 500,000 students. It enjoys global influence in the Islamic Arab Sunni world. In 1961, Al-Azhar was nationalized by President of Egypt then, Gamal Abdel Nasser. You can see him here in this old picture. Its main source of funding of Al-Azhar is the government of Egypt. Since Nasser's time, Al-Azhar has served as a tool to provide religious legitimacy to the policies of all Egyptian regimes, including in the context of their relations with Israel. And for example, during Nasser's time, Al-Azhar decreed that Muslims are forbidden to sign peace treaties with Israel. In contrast, in 1979, as Sadat signed the peace treaty with Israel, as Al-Azhar reversed its position and issued a supportive opinion. The relation between Al-Azhar and the current Egyptian government is somewhat complicated, I would say. In 2015, President Sisi called in his speech to the Egyptian nation for a religious revolution against what he defined as the discourse of radical organizations such as ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood, and asked Al-Azhar to lead this process. Al-Azhar responded, though partially, and began a campaign against radical ideologies. Since then, Al-Azhar is being marketed by Egypt to the world as a global beacon of tolerance and moderation. However, there is one terrorist, radical, religious organization, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, that Al-Azhar has never criticized. This is, of course, Hamas. Moreover, Al-Azhar's Grand Imam, Ahmed El-Tayeb, is maintaining close contacts with the leaders of Hamas. In 2019, he even hosted them in his offices in Cairo. 4 days after the October 7th massacre, El-Tayeb spoke with Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas political bureau, and his message to Haniyeh was, and I quote, "Our hearts are with you." And this brings me to share with you some of the statements of Al-Azhar since the outbreak of the war. I will present here just very few representative examples. On the day of the massacre, on October 7th, Al-Azhar published a statement in which it saluted the Palestinian resistance. This was only the beginning of an ongoing daily pro-Hamas and anti-Israel campaign that is conducted by Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar praises to Hamas did not result from lack of information about the atrocities that happened on the October 7th. How do we know that? Al-Azhar Fatwa Center issued on October 18th a religious ruling 10 days after the massacre permitting the killing of Israeli civilians. It asserted, and I quote again, that these Israelis are not worthy at all to be described as civilians, but rather they are occupiers of land, violators of rights, and deviants from the path of the prophets. Such rhetoric essentially legitimizes the killing of the Israeli civilian victims on October 7th. However, there is also some good news. Deborah, you said before, Chatzi Nechama. This fatwa was removed a few days later, probably following an intervention of the Egyptian authorities. Additionally, Al-Azhar is no stranger to employing anti-Semitic rhetoric. During the war, one of its statements depicted, and I quote, the Zionist enemy as a blood-thirsty wolf, enjoying eating the meat and drinking the blood of children, women, and innocents. Furthermore, an Al-Azhar scholar called for boycotting international companies owned by Jews and advised against working with the Jews, whom he described as treacherous people. Al-Azhar campaign includes the denial of the atrocities of the October 7th. You can see on your left, these atrocities are referred as Zionist disinformation, proven to be a sheer lie, and this is a quote. The demonization of Israel in Al-Azhar's newspaper, South Al-Azhar, the voice of Al-Azhar, includes caricatures, you can see on your right, that compare Israeli conduct to Nazism. South Al-Azhar, this mouthpiece newspaper, has also a children's section. One of the latest issues asked young readers to free Palestine and to draw the map of Palestine from the river to the sea. As you can see here, this map does not include Israel or the agreed upon international legitimate principle of two-state solution. This is a manifestation of actually Islamist, Hamas-like approach that does not recognize the state of Israel and implicitly call for its elimination. Why should we find Al-Azhar's discourse so troubling? For several reasons. First, it provides legitimacy and perhaps even inspiration for terrorist acts. Its stance contributed to the hostile sentiment in Egypt, resulting in the shooting and killing of three Israeli tourists in Alexandria on October 8th. Second, many Muslims from east to the west are being exposed to the messages of Al-Azhar. Since the beginning of the war in Gaza, Al-Azhar University has organized special workshops for its 30,000 foreign Muslim students that learn in Al-Azhar. In addition, beyond its main campus in Cairo, Al-Azhar has branches also outside Egypt, and its messages resonate in mosques from Europe to Southeast Asia. Third, Al-Azhar stands as a highly influential Islamic institution, making it difficult for other Islamic bodies in other Arab and non-Arab countries to present a religious position that against the atrocities of Hamas. What measures, and this will be my concluding remarks, what measures could be taken to address Al-Azhar's pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, and occasionally anti-Semitic rhetoric? So regarding Israel, it might be worthwhile for us in Israel to consider Al-Azhar as a challenge in our relations with Egypt. According to our peace treaty, both parties are committed, and I quote, to abstain from hostile propaganda against each other. Currently, this commitment is not being upheld, and Al-Azhar stands out as a prominent example of this violation. As for Egypt, it is in its own interests to review Al-Azhar's radical stance, which may endanger Sisi's regional vision for stability and development. And I think Egypt will do well to re-establish Al-Azhar and Al-Azhar's role as a bridge between religions and nations. Regarding other regional and international actors, many of them, I believe, share the interest in encouraging Al-Azhar to restrain Al-Azhar's pro-Hamas messages. These actors include, of course, the United States, the EU, whom we heard, but also the UN and the Vatican, which maintain, by the way, quite positive relations with Al-Azhar, as well as moderate Arab countries such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Over the years, the United Arab Emirates has transferred millions of dollars to Al-Azhar, even though it promotes sentiments against peace and normalization, contradicting the UAE's own regional vision. Finally, the global prestige of Al-Azhar should be questioned. It should be questioned as a religious beacon of religious tolerance, and I think this is a very important message. Al-Azhar cannot position itself as a partner in the battle against terrorism and a participant in the interfaith dialogues, while simultaneously endorsing the Hamas massacre of October 7th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ophir. Our next speaker is Ms. Mor Link. Mor is a Neubauer Research Associate at INSS and a PhD candidate in the Department of International Relations at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Her dissertation examines Middle Eastern and North African states within the global investment regime and how domestic characteristics such as religion, culture, and regime type shape their positions within it. She holds a BA and MA with honors from the Hebrew University. Please, Mor.
Hi everyone, I'm very honored to be here today speaking with you. I'll be sharing some preliminary results of a research project I'm working on titled Shaping Perceptions of Conflict, How Holocaust Narratives Inform Arab Media's Depiction of the Gaza War. And in this research, I explore how Holocaust denial and distortion narratives influence the way Arabic media, both traditional media and social media, address the current Gaza war, and specifically the events of the October 7th massacre, utilizing a mixture of denial, distortion, and justification that echo traditional Holocaust narratives. And I also examine how these events, the Gaza war, has been compared on numerous outlets and social media users to the Holocaust. So first, let us spend a few moments to say what is Holocaust denial and distortion. So the IRA working definition of Holocaust denial and distortion is discourse and propaganda that deny the historical reality and the extent of the extermination of the Jews by the Nazis and their accomplices in World War II. And some of the manifestations of this phenomenon include attempting to excuse or downplay the severity and key aspects of the Holocaust, underreporting the number of victims, disputing or denying the intentional nature of the Jewish genocide, denying or questioning the use of known methods of mass destruction during the Holocaust, and lastly and importantly, accusing the Jews of fabricating or inflating the Holocaust for political or financial gain, suggesting that it was the result of a conspiracy plotted by the Jews themselves. And also importantly, we can see that Holocaust denial and distortion is pretty prevalent in the Muslim and Arab world. These data are unfortunately outdated from 2014. This is ADL data, but we see that it paints a very grim picture with over 60% of respondents in the MENA region in the Middle East and North Africa, either believing that the Holocaust is a pure myth or that it has been much exaggerated vis-a-vis the number of victims or the atrocities perpetrated, with only 22% of respondents believing that the historical accounts are accurate. And among some states, some audiences, these figures are even much higher. As we can see, respondents from the West Bank and Gaza, 82% of respondents in these places believe that the Holocaust is either a myth or greatly exaggerated. And of course, these perceptions are subject to change. And as Ambassador Liebstadt said, there have been some positive changes, specifically among countries that have signed the Abraham Accords. And I can talk a bit more about that in the Q&A. So I want to point out four general narratives that emerge from traditional media and social media in Arabic concerning the October 7th massacre, involving denial, distortion, and justification. So the first is reducing the perceived scale of the attack, downplaying its severity, the number of victims, and the nature of the crimes, also asserting that Israel is responsible for the majority of civilian casualties, refuting the claim that Hamas intended to commit genocide with arguments suggesting that the terror attack was aimed only at military targets, accusing Israel of inflating the details and the numbers of the attack to justify a comprehensive war in Gaza, and lastly, rationalizing and legitimizing the massacre as a natural, quote-unquote, response to Israeli offenses and a legitimate aspect of Palestinian resistance. And I have two examples here. The first is from Twitter, or X as we should call it, from a Yemenite influencer with over 230K followers, saying, and the tweet reads, "Watch one of the Al-Qassam Brigade's heroes entering the home of an elderly woman with a defenseless girl beside her. He neither scared her nor displaced or harmed her. He reassured her, affirming, 'We represent our morals and our faith. We reject the killing of the elderly, children, and the weak.'" And this was given as proof that the atrocities that Israel says that Hamas perpetrated did not actually take place. And the second example is of an UNRWA school principal posted on Facebook on October 7th, saying that in one way or another, it is a time of restoring rights and redressing the grievances of those who were wronged. A second theme is comparing the Gaza war to the Holocaust, with claims that arguing that the true Holocaust is what is occurring in Gaza, asserting that the conflict in Gaza surpasses the horrors of the Holocaust, as well as portraying Israel as a Nazi-like state, equating Zionism with Nazism, and drawing parallels between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Hitler. And this is one of the more mellow graphic examples included in this online. And I have here two examples. The first of them is from a Bahraini newspaper, Akhbar al-Khalij, saying that what the Palestinian people have endured for the past 75 years is a Holocaust of their own, surpassing Zionist narratives and legends about the Jewish Holocaust. The Zionist entity has perpetrated crimes beyond anything seen worldwide, rendering the Palestinian Holocaust 1,000 times more gruesome. And the second example is again from social media. This time it's an Egyptian influencer And the tweet reads, "We've heard much about Hitler's Holocaust, yet nothing compares to what we're witnessing, the Gaza Holocaust unfolding live before the entire world. While propaganda has morphed the Nazi Holocaust into an untouchable myth, the world is now witnessing the true massacre." And these are only very limited examples. Unfortunately, there are numerous instances. I can give you more examples in the Q&A. And I think that it affirms, it highlights the importance of combating Holocaust denial and distortion as part of combating anti-Semitism, because we see that these narrative tools of Holocaust denial, Holocaust distortion are very much prevalent in the current conflict and shapes the perception of how this war is perceived in Arabic media, both traditional media and social media. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mo. Our next speaker is Arik Agassi. Arik Agassi is an expert in the field of global policy and education. As the COO and head of the Global Partnership at the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education, Impact SE, he leads the work of a think tank that analyzes curricula around the world through UNESCO-defined standards. Impact SE's work stimulates positive change in school textbooks, and its policy recommendations have been used as roadmaps by many governments for introducing systematic reforms in national curricula worldwide. The title of his presentation is Textbooks as Political Predictors and Barriers or Blueprints for Radicalization.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Adi, Ruti, distinguished guests, Ambassador Lipstadt. I want to speak to all of you today about 25 years of experience looking at textbooks and curricula around the region and how textbooks can be a power for change and a political predictor. So first of all, why textbooks? Why education? Many leaders and organizations throughout history understood the power of education to be either a barrier to radicalization or a blueprint to radicalization. Two prominent examples. The Nazis, one of the first things that they've done when they took power is change and completely rewrite their educational curriculum. Same with ISIS. When they ran into Mosul, one of the first things that they've done, in parallel to other things, was throw away the current textbooks and rewrite their own narratives. Nelson Mandela's one of his most famous quotes is, "Education has the power to change societies." And leaders in the region understand this power, and I'm going to show you some examples, both positive and negative, how they utilize this power to take the next generation of their societies to different directions. I want to start with the current situation with the Palestinian education in Gaza, UNRWA schools, and Palestinian Authority schools. They all study from the exact same school textbooks in use in Gaza, in the West Bank, and UNRWA schools and in East Jerusalem. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, just to give you a taste of what children are learning every single day since the year 2000. Fate of Israeli Jews is extermination. This is a teacher guide, not a textbook, a guide for a teacher to teach Arabic language. The exact quote is, "The Zionists are the terrorists of the modern age, and their fate is disappearance." So when a child in grade 6 is told this by his teacher, you can understand the connection. This is an example created by UNRWA, and they describe a terror attack against a civilian bus filled with Jews burning in fire from a Molotov cocktail as a barbecue party to teach Arabic reading comprehension in grade 9. Dalal Mughrabi, a renowned Fatah female terrorist who killed 38 Israelis on a civilian bus in 1979, including 13 children, is described as a role model for Palestinian kids, particularly girls, not doctors, not scientists, not peacemakers, terrorists. And she is described, and you can see here an image of this poster in the UNRWA school. This is in a grade 5 Arabic language reading comprehension textbook. This is not a history textbook describing a moment in time. It's to teach reading and writing through glorifying acts of terror against civilians. The 1972 Munich Olympic massacre is justified and openly endorsed. The Israeli Olympians are described as Zionist targets. Another exercise created by UNRWA describes jihad as the most important meaning of life. So again, not to succeed, not to raise a family, have a career, jihad is the most important thing. Suicide bombings are glorified, as well as cutting the necks of the enemy. This is grade 8 reading comprehension. There's an image here of a Palestinian gunman firing at Israeli soldiers, but within the reading comprehension, they're proud of Palestinians wearing explosive belts and daggers falling on necks of the enemy in grade 8. Anti-Semitism is also prominent in the textbooks, not necessarily in a Zionist perspective, but in an anti-Jewish collective manner. So this is a teacher guide for grade 10 geography and history book where teachers are instructed to punish students for not connecting Judaism with murder. So they have anti-Semitic grading instructions for the teacher guide. Anti-Semitic imagery, including the famous Zionist arm holding a globe in parallel to a U.S. flag or arm with a U.S. flag on it holding a globe. Zionist Jews control media, money, and politics, so classic European anti-Semitism is also prominent in the Palestinian textbooks, again, used in Gaza in Hamas schools, used in UNRWA schools, and used in Palestinian Authority schools. First grade, to read and write the letter Ha, H. Instead of hat, the words that they use to practice writing this letter is martyr, shahid, or hujum, attack. Violence also inserted into science and math. So instead of counting apples and pears in calculus for 4th grade, calculus is taught by counting martyrs and suicide bombers in the first and second intifada, and students are asked, how many martyrs have died in the first intifada? How many in the second intifada? How many martyrs do you get? This is 4th grade math textbooks. Newton's law of motion, not by an apple falling from a tree, but by a Palestinian youth masked with a slingshot towards IDF soldiers with a question asked, what are the forces that are used from the slingshot to the IDF soldiers to describe mass, tensile strength, and motion? Obviously maps, everybody speaks about the maps, they're also in class, but in the textbooks, the river to the sea cliche is not just a cliche, it's a literal quote in the textbooks describing the entire territory of Palestine as from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, also in UNRWA schools and in non-UNRWA schools. How does this play out in October 7th? We have here the Bir el-Saba Boys School in Rafah, Muhammad Yasser Zayed Abu Rizak. This is a video of his interrogation. He crossed into Israel on October 7th and committed many atrocities. We went into the Facebook page of the school, and we have seen in this Facebook page, this is a Hamas-run school. The dream of honor is not far away. You either live as a hero or die as a martyr, with a play about Palestinian prisoners and gunmen within the school setting. So this is not a play outside. This is not a Hamas summer camp. This is not anything like that. It's a school. Palestinian UNRWA schools celebrate the Hamas 7 attack. There's UNRWA schools who celebrated this attack, as well as Palestinian schools. There's second grade girls who are painting Hamas paragliders who crossed into Israel. And then also Hamas ministers who used to be UNRWA staffers. This is Jawad Abu Shimale, used to be Hamas's Minister of Economy, who was killed on October 10th. Other terrorists who were responsible for murdering Israelis, all UNRWA graduates. I'll end with 2 minutes on positive changes in the region where countries understood the power of textbooks to do better and to stabilize their societies. Saudi Arabia has recently removed a lot of problematic examples from the Protocols to the Elders of Zion. Another example saying that Zionists use drugs, women, money, politics, and media to achieve their goals. And even this year, the word Palestine on the map was removed. Israel is still not on the map, but at least the word Palestine stretched from on the entire border is removed. Egypt recently, with Dr. Winter here, Impact SC did this research, started removing textbooks connecting ancient Islamic battles between Jews and the Prophet to modern-day Israel and Zionism. They removed that with ideas of peace and tolerance. Morocco, which Ambassador Lipstadt talked about, inserted Jewish culture and history within their textbooks. You have pictures here of the Sabbath and a Muslim neighbor coming to visit a Jewish family, Mimuna, the king in a synagogue. All these in new textbooks recently printed. And the last example is the UAE, who recently announced they will introduce Holocaust education. They added 3 months after the normalization treaty with Israel, the information about it in Islamic education to give it a religious justification, including messages about peace. I'll end here, and if anybody wants more examples, we have many examples from all countries in the region moving in different directions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arik. Our last speaker before we open for discussion, Dr. Ehud Rosen, specializes in modern political Islam and the Red-Green Alliance between far-left activists and political Islamists in the West. He's a team member of the INSS project on perceptions of Jews and Israel in the Arab Muslim world and their influence on the West. The title of his presentation is The Coming Together of Red and Green Narratives in Western Countries. Please, Udi, and later on we're opening it for questions.
Okay, good afternoon. Pleasure to be here with you. So anti-Semitism has a long history and many forefathers. In our time, it is especially thriving among the radical fringes across the political spectrum. What we've been mainly witnessing in Western countries since October the 7th is the result of over 20 years of tactic red-green alliance between elements in the far left and political and radical Islamists, spearheaded by those activists who adhere to the school of thought of the Muslim Brotherhood, which, again, is also the mother movement of Hamas. Both sides have been utilizing the freedoms the democracy allows to advance their message through grassroots, civil society, organizations and networks, some of which also supported by state players. The playgrounds are social, political, and educational and economic strongholds like the world of the academia, trade unions, the world of NGOs, and human rights groups, which are unfortunately not asked too many hard questions as to their own affiliations or of those they choose to partner with. The overseas networks affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, which despite having a minor actual following, purport to speak for Muslims in Western countries, have also provided another layer of support and promotion to Hamas, and during the years, Hamas operatives who moved to Western countries joined them. A senior Hamas figure once divided the Muslim nation into two cultural trends. The first, the trend of resistance, or mukawama, which according to him mobilizes the masses and should be transformed into a popular thought. This versus the trend of what he called surrender or submission, Islam, which he said has many open doors and the backing of many Western countries. Such elements in the Western far left were essential in the process of mainstreaming and romanticizing this trend of resistance, this while mainstreaming themselves. They're riding on the Palestinian issue by applying the terminology of oppressor and oppressed and of a non-violent struggle against colonialism by direct action activism and the boycotts movement. They utilize Western identity politics and intersectionality with other supposedly oppressed minorities. This way, both Reds and the Greens are free to push the call for a global intifada, meant eventually to challenge the existing liberal order, and the Green side can call, for example, for a peaceful intifada in countries like France against its government policies. Speakers from the Green side, whose vision is one of a long term, continue to draw their hope from what I see in the streets of Europe and the States these days. Perhaps the biggest success of this Red-Green Alliance, whose people are now an integral part of Western politics and civil service, is the ability to detach the narrative it pushes from any necessity to provide logical explanations or facts. All that matters now is the narrative of victimhood, which makes you automatically right and thus the other side automatically wrong. We are now, ladies and gentlemen, in a new phase in which a new type of hybrid groups is in formation in Western countries, comprised of activists from the younger generation who come from different radical backgrounds, acting together also against the Western establishment itself, as both Ambassador Lipstadt and the Commissioner mentioned. The way liberal democracies respond to this outbreak of hatred and violence is not only crucial for the safety of Israel and the Jewish communities, but also for their own stability. And in any case, those dealing with the political rise of the far-right elements already noted that this Red-Green Alliance activism is one of the major factors there. For my presentation, I think it was enough to prepare one slide. You can see one of the biggest demonstrations which took place in the States. Below you can see the logos of the organizers, which stray from the affiliates of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States to affiliates of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, again in the States, and many, many far-left groups. And these are the slogans which were raised during only one of numerous demonstrations taking place in the streets today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Udi. Thank you to all the speakers. We are now opening our panel for Q&A, for your questions. You're all welcome, of course, to refer questions to our speakers, of course, also to Professor Lipstadt. If there are any questions, there's a microphone here. Any questions? Yes, here. There's a gentleman here. We'll collect a few and then we'll let you answer.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much all for being here, and thank you, Ambassador, for the work that you've done throughout the years. I have two questions, but...
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Manny Dahari. I work for the Embassy of Kosovo here in Jerusalem, and I have two questions. I mean, the first part that I want to ask is, I feel like we kind of like didn't really touch up much on the topic of the expulsion of Jews from Arab countries, which should have been really, I think, should have talked about. And this is as someone who was born and raised in Yemen, and I believe my family was one of the last families to escape Yemen. And I would have wanted to ask the minister, but he's not here, why did it take Israel so long to dedicate a day to commemorate the Jews from Arab countries? And the other question is, for the ambassador, is the Biden administration doing much to combat anti-Semitism in countries that do not have peace with Israel?
I'll let Professor Lipstadt first answer.
First of all, on your first point about the expulsion of Jews from Arab lands, I think it's a very important issue and one that has been taking a longer perspective. You look slightly younger than I am. It's more on the table now than it's ever been before, but not enough. I'm not sure which countries you're referring to, but the Biden administration, the United States government is universally opposed to anti-Semitism wherever it is. Naturally, with the countries with which we have good relations, we feel we can exert more concern, but it doesn't stop us. Where we see anti-Semitism, we will fight it. I think one of the things to recognize, I didn't mention this in my talk, but that anti-Semitism, some people speak about the canary in the coal mine, anti-Semitism should also be seen as the flashing amber light of destabilizing of a society. So where we see it, we are concerned about it.
Thank you very much. Further questions? If not, maybe I'll ask a question of my own. Dr. Winter, Ophir, regarding your presentation. To what degree are the authorities in Cairo able to influence Al-Azhar's position in Israel's Hamas war, do you think?
Thank you for your question. I will just a short comment to what you mentioned about the Jews of Egypt. There was, like the minister said, a big community of Jews in Egypt. About 80 or 90,000 Jews were living in Egypt. I have to say there are, let's say, contradictory trends on that regard in Egypt during the recent years. We found some positive findings also in Egyptian textbooks. In a joint research I make with Impact SE. There are also many books that are being authored about the heritage of the Jews in Egypt. At the same time, maybe you heard on the news recently, Jews of Egypt decided not to celebrate this year. There are very few, but they decided not to celebrate Hanukkah. Even though some of the Egyptian synagogues were being renovated during the recent years, and there is still separation in Egypt between, let's say, openness to Judaism to the relations with the Jewish state. So these are two different issues. Regarding your question, Adi, I assume the Egyptian regime has influence on Al-Azhar, it finances Al-Azhar, and it has, I think, the ability to improve the messages that are coming out from Al-Azhar. Yet we should ask ourselves what the Egyptian regime could gain from Al-Azhar current militant line. So I think this is a good question, and I think that this line also serves, unfortunately, some of the official stances in Egypt in terms of, divert the public opinion from internal issues to Israel, which is the external enemy. I think there is also a kind of a co-optation of the protest against Israel by the regime. They prefer that the protests will be against or through the religious establishment, official establishment of Al-Azhar, then it will be dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood and could be also transformed into a protest not only against Israel, but also against the Egyptian authorities.
Thank you. Any further questions, references from your side? We discussed a lot, of course, the challenges and we saw it in all of your presentations, of course, what has been going on. We know it's not new. It happened also, of course, before October 7th, but it has definitely increased since then. Arik, we saw what you presented, depressing information about what you in Impact SC have found in textbooks. What are your recommendations to combat that? On the day after, everybody's talking about the day after the Israel-Hamas war. What do you expect to see, or what would you like to see in textbooks in the Palestinian Authority in Gaza and the West Bank after the war?
Thank you for the question. The solution to Gaza, nobody has one, but in the realm of education, it's actually, I'll surprise you, very, very, very simple. What happened up to October 7th cannot continue in terms of this education, and we're working now on a very practical, simple solution that any government can advocate, which is basically taking the same Palestinian Authority textbooks. Not every single page has incitement to hatred or violence, but there are a lot of it there. And you can replace it with Islamic values, Arab values, culture, like other countries in the region have done, by Palestinians themselves who should write this material and replace the hate with peace and tolerance and reprint the exact same textbooks with the same logo by the Ministry of Education and basically take out the hate. It's not expensive, it's easy to do. There are case studies in the region where there are refugee curricula where international community and NGOs have created depoliticized content that has nothing to do with violence. There is reality on the ground, and we assess textbooks based on UNESCO standards. And obviously, you know, they can speak about realities of the occupation, hardships that happen, but as long as it does not pass this, you know, threshold or red line of not meeting UNESCO standards and pushing children towards violence at a very young age, as we've seen in these examples. And this is, you know, we've been told when we've saw this, well, this is might be seen as colonialism, where you're trying to insert, not Impact SC is saying how Palestinians should teach or the international community, but this should come from Palestinians themselves, and there are Palestinians out there who are working with to use the exact same textbooks, but replace the problematic chapter with a surah or a hadith from the Quran that speaks about tolerance and peace. Islam is a religion of peace. Other countries have used texts based on Islamic and Arab culture to create a stable society for their futures. The same thing can be done tomorrow, and a new curriculum that we're working on now with Palestinians just to infuse those values based on Palestinian narrative of events and Islamic identity and culture based on peace and tolerance, I think is something also parents would want for their own Palestinian children. So on October 7th won't happen again, because Hamas it's an ideology. And if you remove Hamas today and you don't deal with the education, you will get another version of it in 15 or 20 years.
Thank you very much. Well, now we are diving more and more into the narratives themselves. And can you more elaborate on how exactly are Holocaust distortions used after October 7th in Gaza? What are the narratives that are told with regards, the distortions, the lies that are told with regards to the Holocaust?
Thank you, Adi. So I think that the narrative tools that are most prominent in this discourse is a mixture of distorting and denying the actual historical facts of the October 7th massacre. As I said, reducing the number of victims, arguing that some of the crimes that we know that happened because they were filmed and they were documented did not happen, whether executions, sexual violence, and so on. And just another comment regarding how is it used or misused for October 7th? Okay, I understand. I think that you can see a lot of terms from the Holocaust denial lexicon, so to speak, being used in talking about the Gaza war, in talking about the October 7th massacre, such as equating Israel to be a Nazi state, equating Zionism with Nazism, equating the Israeli army, Israeli IDF soldiers with Nazi soldiers. You see it also, you see it on social media, and you also see it on traditional media. And also in outlets that are aligned with the regimes that Israel has relations with, whether peace treaties like Egypt and Jordan, or normalization treaties, Morocco, the Emirates, and Bahrain. And one last comment regarding the commemorating Jewish communities in the Arab world. So that's another theme I've encountered when conducting this research, that a lot of social media users are saying to Israelis, to Israeli Jews, go back to where you came from, and that's supposed to be only Western Europe or Eastern Europe, Poland in particular, completely disregarding, again, the historical fact that many Israeli Jews have roots in a lot of countries in the region, from Morocco in the west to Iran in the east. And again, it shows a distortion of the historical reality, making it so much harder to go towards a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Israeli-Arab conflict more broadly.
Very alarming. Udi, you discussed in your presentation this hybrid of groups, Red-Green Alliance. Do you see a wider meaning to what we've witnessed? I mean, this, of course, has existed, of course, before October 7th, but is there a new kind of quality or meaning to what we've seen afterwards with regard to this hybrid, this new generation of hybrid groups?
Thank you. Let me go back to the last part of my words. I think, again, I mean, we have to understand first, the issue is first of all understanding that Hamas is part of something much wider. It is an integral part of the wider political Islamist Sunni world. This ideology has been given a voice all over the Western world for a long time. And what we start to see now with these hybrid groups is actually the younger generation who no longer feels compelled for facts. They simply live off these narratives. And eventually they come to, as both Ambassador Lipstadt and the Commissioner mentioned, eventually they come to challenge the actual establishment in Western countries. This is the basis for what they do now. We have seen several examples in the past few months. There was a lady, a graduate of law school in one of the universities in America, who spoke in very anti-Israel and anti-Semitic language. However, she also spoke against the police. She saw the American police as her enemy. And this is the basis of what, yeah, exactly. And we see now over TikTok, young Americans start to adore Osama bin Laden to justify the 9/11 attacks. This is all coming from these narratives who have been around for far too long and went unchallenged.
Well, I think what we've heard is an exceptionally disturbing set of developments with some positive news there. But I think it shows the degree to which anti-Semitism has become intertwined with a geopolitical crisis. And that doesn't mean that every criticism of Israel is necessarily anti-Semitic. If so, the hundreds of thousands of protesters we saw on the street up until October 7th would be anti-Semites. It's certainly not that. But often, not always, but often this criticism policy either consciously or unconsciously morphs into anti-Semitism. So I think that needs to be addressed, and to come back to where I started with, we have to keep in mind anti-Semitism as a threat to international security, international stability, and democracy.
Thank you very much. To conclude this panel, I'd like to ask Michal Kotler-Wunsch, Israel's Special Envoy for Combating Antisemitism, to come to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's a room of great hope on this 8th night of Hanukkah to look out into this room. And thank you for that very, very instructive panel, to the researchers from INSS and to Impact SC. And thank you, most importantly, to my very important and esteemed colleague, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt. And I don't know if Katarina von Schnurbein is still here, but really I can't have more important peers in this coalition of special envoys for combating anti-Semitism that I am very humbled to join just weeks before 10/7. I don't want to speak for too long. I just want to conclude by pointing out a few things that I think wrap up what we heard about today, that began or centered around the 850,000 Jews from Arab lands and Iran, one of whom actually was my grandfather from Iraq, who didn't leave because he chose to. He left after the Farhud pogroms that actually ethnically cleansed the majority of the Middle East from its Jewish populations in Arab lands and Iran. And I say that because in the intersection with October 7th and the atrocities of the intersection of October 7th, I think that we would be remiss if we did not quote the late Golda Meir, who I've had the pleasure of spending some time with Deborah in the last 2 days. So another quote was that the world hates a Jew who hits back. The world loves us only when we are to be pitied. Golda Meir. Now, the reason that I think that that is an important quote at this moment, post 10/7, and when we look at what the Abraham Accords prospectively offered, was the paradigmal shift. That whereas in 1948, and by the way, a lot of what we saw here, and actually also the responses to 10/7 made very clear this is not about 1967, right? It's not about land or Judea and Samaria, and it's not. This is about 1948. It says it everywhere in all of the signs. This is about 1948. It's about 75 years. Now, 75 years ago, Jews, a prototypical indigenous people that speak the same language, Hebrew, and read the same book, the Bible, and light the same Hanukkah candles tonight, the 8th candle, for thousands of years, returned to an ancestral homeland. And in the war against the State of Israel, or the continued wars launched from 1948 and until 1973, actually the failure to destroy the State of Israel led to what I would call the unconventional war for public opinion, beginning with the 3 no's of Khartoum. We haven't mentioned them: no to recognition, no to negotiation, and no to peace with Israel. What the Abraham Accords actually hold potentially, and what the curriculum adjusted show, is the transition or the paradigmal shift from the 3 no's to the 3 yeses. Begin with yes to recognition of Israel as what it was founded to be, a Jewish democratic state. Yes to negotiation with Israel enables the yes to peace with Israel. That's the hope that I believe that in many ways October 7th, amongst other things, is an attack on, pushing back that prospective, potential paradigmal shift that allows and enables the recognition to be the first step, and in many ways allows and enables us to understand why it is critical that we recognize the mutation of anti-Semitism, the oldest hatred in the world, as Professor Wistrich called it, the oldest hatred that has mutated over time by latching on to guiding social constructs, religion, science, the secular religion of our time, social justice or human rights, if you will, and right back to religion, as we have seen. What 10/7 did for the world, and I believe it's a moment that we shouldn't miss, like 9/11, what 10/7 did was create an understanding of the intersection of what Professor Lipstadt referred to, Special Envoy Lipstadt referred to as the extreme right or the extreme left or the extreme Islam, right? The key word being extreme. It is about extremism that undermines not just democratic values, but any society which enables it to fester and permeate, including those countries from which 850,000 Jews were expelled after years of, and hundreds of years of contributing and being active members of those societies. I think that at this moment in time, and as we prepare to light the 8th candle of Hanukkah, that actually celebrate the courage and the moral clarity with which Jews reclaimed the right to their religion, to their identity, and to be a part of whatever, in this case, geopolitical entity they are in the middle of, that is the Middle East, and their ancestral homeland and sovereignty. I think that we have a great, great prospective, hopeful message, but it requires moral clarity and courage to identify the mutation of anti-Semitism as what 10/7 showed, which is the denial of Israel's very right to exist, 1948, as I said, and not 1967, and identify and combat that strain of anti-Semitism using the hope of the Abraham Accords with a paradigmal shift to the 3 yeses. Yes to recognition of the State of Israel as what it was founded to be, a Jewish democracy. Yes to negotiation with that state for all populations in the area, including Palestinians, and yes, to peace in the region and amongst all countries in this region and beyond. So thank you for this very informative panel. Thank you, Ruti, for putting together this very important discussion, and thank you all for being here and really infusing us with hope as we prepare to light this 8th candle of Hanukkah for hope and miracles. Thanks.
Michal Kotler, Special Envoy for Combating Antisemitism, thank you very much. Thank you, of course, for your enlightening words. Thank you, Special Envoy Lipstadt, for always reminding us what is the right way to think and to behave. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of you for coming today. Thank you for Shahar Ilam, our project leader. Thank you, Ruti Cohen-Dar, for the wonderful collaboration. And thank you all, and happy Hanukkah.